They called me trash at dinner. Everyone laughed. My husband said nothing. But I smiled because I knew something they didn't. In 72 hours, I didn't just destroy their empire. I poisoned everything they loved and made them beg me for mercy on their knees. And the twist? I was wearing a wire the whole time. Stay with me, because the revenge I got was so sweet, so perfectly calculated, that by the end of this story, you'll understand why some people deserve to lose everything. And I mean everything. This is how I took down a family that thought they were untouchable. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. People always ask me if I regret what I did. They want to know if I feel guilty for destroying an entire family. And I tell them the same thing every time. I sleep just fine at night. Better than I ever did when I was trying to fit into their world. My name is Rachel, and I need you to understand something before we go any further. I'm not some villain in a movie. I'm not someone who was out for revenge from day one. I was just a woman who fell in love with the wrong man and married into the wrong family. And when they pushed me too far, well, I pushed back. Hard. Let me take you back to the beginning, to who I was before all of this happened. I grew up in the system. Foster care, if you want to call it that. 7 different homes before I turned 18. Some were okay, some were bad, and none of them were home. When I aged out, I had $300 to my name and a high school diploma. That was it. But I wasn't going to let that be my story. I worked double shifts at a restaurant, saved every penny, and put myself through college. Community college first, then I transferred to a state university on a scholarship. I studied hard, graduated top of my class, and got my master's degree in environmental compliance and regulation. By the time I was 33, I was the head of environmental compliance for the entire southern region. My job was to inspect factories, power plants, manufacturing facilities, and make sure they weren't breaking environmental laws. That's important. Remember that part. It matters later. I met Daniel at a charity event 5 years ago. He was tall, good-looking, had this smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He told me his family owned Montgomery Steel, one of the biggest steel manufacturing companies in the region. They'd been around for almost 100 years, employing thousands of people. We dated for 6 months, and honestly, it was perfect. He was kind, he listened to me, he seemed genuinely proud of my work. But then came the day he said we should meet his family. And that's when I saw a different side of him. We were driving to his parents' estate when he said something that should have made me turn the car around. He said, "My mother can be a bit particular about who I bring home. But don't worry, I think you'll win her over eventually." Eventually? Like I was some kind of project that needed work. The house, if you can even call it that, looked like something out of a magazine. Stone walls, iron gates, a driveway that seemed to go on forever. His mother, Patricia, opened the door wearing diamonds that probably cost more than I'd earned in my entire life. She looked at me the way you'd look at something you stepped in on the sidewalk. "Oh," she said, like she was surprised. "Daniel didn't mention you were. Well, come in, I suppose." His father, Richard, barely acknowledged me, just grunted and went back to his office. His sister, Lauren, actually asked me if I was the new housekeeper before Daniel corrected her. And his brother, Thomas, he just laughed and said, "Well, this is going to be interesting." But I loved Daniel. Or at least, I thought I did. So I smiled through it all. I ignored the comments. I pretended not to notice when they'd stopped talking about business the moment I walked into a room. I told myself it would get better. It didn't. We got married 2 years later, and Patricia wore white to my wedding. White, like she was trying to compete with me on my own day. In her speech, she talked about maintaining the family legacy and preserving what matters. Everyone knew what she really meant. For 3 years, I tried. God, how I tried. I went to their monthly dinners at the estate. I bit my tongue when they made their little comments. I dressed the way they wanted. I talked the way they wanted. I made myself smaller and smaller, hoping that one day they'd finally see me as part of the family. I was wrong. The mandatory Sunday dinners were the worst part. Once a month, we had to show up at the estate for what Patricia called family time. But really, it was just her way of reminding everyone who was in charge and where I ranked in the family hierarchy, which was somewhere below the furniture. But this one particular Sunday, something was different. I could feel it the moment we walked in. Patricia had this look in her eyes, like a cat that had finally cornered a mouse. She'd been waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and tonight was that night. We weren't even through drinks when Lauren walked past me with a full glass of red wine and accidentally bumped into me. The wine went everywhere, all over my white dress. She gasped like she was in a play and said, "Oh no, I'm so sorry." "Well, I'm sure you can get another one at wherever it is you shop." The message was clear. She thought I shopped at thrift stores, at discount places. Places beneath them. I just smiled, excused myself to the bathroom, and listened to her giggling with Patricia in the next room. That was just the warm-up. The real show was about to begin at dinner. And that's when everything changed. That's when I realized that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I sacrificed, I would never be good enough for these people. And more importantly, that's when I realized I didn't want to be. At dinner, Thomas announced that his wife Sarah was pregnant. You would have thought he'd just announced he'd cured cancer. Patricia actually started crying, happy tears, and kept saying, "Finally, a true Montgomery grandchild. Pure family blood." Daniel and I had been trying to have a baby for 8 months. I'd thought maybe a child would help me finally belong in this family. But the way Patricia said true grandchild and pure blood made everything crystal clear. My children would never be accepted either. I made the mistake of mentioning that Daniel and I had been trying too. The entire table went silent. Patricia put down her fork slowly, looked at me with ice in her eyes, and said, "Are you?" How unfortunate that would be. The air in that room became so thick you could hardly breathe. But I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. I just kept eating, which made her even angrier. The conversation moved to business. Richard started talking about expansion plans with Thomas. I'd read an article that morning about new environmental regulations affecting steel manufacturing, so I mentioned it. I thought maybe I could contribute something valuable, show them that I understood their world. Everyone stopped talking. Just stopped. Patricia stared at me like I'd committed some terrible crime, then said in this sweet, poisonous voice, "Rachel, darling, when the adults are discussing important matters, perhaps you should just listen." I felt my face get hot, but I didn't respond. I just took another bite of my food and another sip of wine. Daniel shifted in his seat uncomfortably, but he said nothing. Not one single word in my defense. That's when I knew. After 3 years of hoping, of waiting for him to finally stand up for me, I understood that he never would. I was alone in this family, and I would always be alone. But Patricia wasn't finished with me yet. She stood up, threw her napkin on the table like she was making some grand statement, and walked around to my side. Everyone watched in complete silence. "Let me make something very clear," she said, standing over me. "Nobody at this table needs you. Nobody wants you here. You're trash that my son dragged in off the streets, and one day he'll wake up and throw you back where you belong." Then she reached over and picked up my plate, which still had food on it. She actually took my plate away like I was a child being punished. I could hear Lauren trying not to laugh. Thomas was smirking into his wine glass. Sarah looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Richard nodded slowly, like Patricia had said something wise and true. And Daniel stared at his plate and mumbled, "Mom, come on," in the weakest voice I'd ever heard. That was it. That was his defense of his wife. After 3 years of accumulated disrespect, after his mother called me street trash to my face and physically humiliated me, that was all he could manage. I stood up slowly. I smoothed down my wine-stained dress. And I smiled. Not a fake smile, but a real, genuine smile. Because in that moment, everything became perfectly clear. I looked at each of them, one by one, letting the silence stretch out like a rubber band about to snap. Then I said, "Thank you for dinner, Patricia." It was very enlightening. I walked out of that dining room with my head held high. I grabbed my purse from the entrance hall and went straight to my car. Daniel didn't follow me. Of course he didn't. I sat in my car in their circular driveway and pulled out my phone. I found a number I'd had saved for 2 years, a number I'd hoped I'd never have to use. A man answered on the first ring. "James," I said, my voice completely steady. "It's time. Do everything we discussed. All of it." He asked if I was absolutely sure, and I looked back at that mansion with all its lights glowing, looking so perfect and beautiful from the outside. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "Tear it all down." Now, let me tell you what they didn't know. What none of them had any idea about. 2 years earlier, I'd been at one of these Sunday dinners. I got up to use the bathroom, and on my way back, I passed Richard's office. The door was slightly open, and I heard him and Thomas talking in low voices about the situation with the waste disposal and keeping the inspectors quiet. Those words made my blood run cold. See, in my line of work, you learn to recognize certain phrases that are major red flags. Keeping inspectors quiet is one of the biggest. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't tell Daniel. Instead, I hired James, a forensic environmental investigator and private detective. I paid him with my own money, from an account Daniel didn't know I had. For 2 years, James dug into Montgomery Steel. And what he found made me sick to my stomach. They weren't just cutting corners to save money. They were dumping toxic waste into the river system. They were falsifying environmental reports. They were bribing government inspectors across multiple states. They were exposing their workers to dangerous chemicals without proper safety equipment. They were covering up workplace accidents that had left people permanently injured. Do you understand what this means? People were being poisoned. The water supply for entire communities was being contaminated. Workers were getting sick, getting cancer, and the family knew about it. They knew, and they kept doing it anyway, all to protect their profits and their lifestyle. This wasn't just about them being mean to me. This was about lives being destroyed. I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't divorce Daniel and pretend I didn't know what his family was doing. I had a moral obligation, a legal obligation, to report this. People's lives depended on it. So I did something I never imagined I'd do. I contacted the Environmental Protection Agency and the FBI. I became a confidential informant. For 8 months, I wore a wire to family dinners. I recorded conversations in the car with Daniel. I documented everything. I photographed documents when I was alone in Richard's office. I collected evidence of every single violation, every bribe, every cover-up. The federal agents were building a case that would destroy Montgomery Steel completely. And I was the insider making it all possible. I told myself I'd give them one last chance. If they showed me even a tiny bit of respect, even the smallest hint of humanity, maybe I'd find another way. Maybe I wouldn't go through with it. But that night, when Patricia called me street trash and took my plate away like I was nothing, like I was less than human, that was my answer. They'd had 3 years to treat me with basic decency. They chose not to. So I chose to end them. That night, after I made the call to James from the driveway, I drove home alone. Daniel stayed at his parents' house for an emergency family meeting that I wasn't invited to. I took a long bath, drank a glass of wine, and slept better than I had in months. The next morning at exactly 6 o'clock, federal agents raided Montgomery Steel. FBI agents, environmental investigators, federal marshals, IRS agents, the entire alphabet of law enforcement descended on their headquarters like a storm. They seized computers, files, financial records, everything. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters lined the streets outside. By 7 in the morning, it was the lead story on every news channel. Major steel manufacturer under investigation for environmental crimes and fraud. They showed footage of agents carrying boxes out of the building. Of Richard being led out in handcuffs, trying to hide his face. Of Patricia in the parking lot, screaming at reporters to leave her alone. Daniel called me 17 times before 8 in the morning. I was getting ready for work, taking my time with my makeup, choosing my favorite outfit. I finally answered on the 18th call. "Hey honey, what's wrong?" I said, my voice sweet and concerned. He was hysterical, barely able to form words. "What's wrong? What's wrong, Rachel? My family's business is being destroyed. The feds are everywhere. They arrested my father. My mother is losing her mind. Where are you?" "I'm getting ready for work, baby," I said calmly. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. These things get sorted out." He started yelling about needing lawyers, needing money, asking if I could call someone at my agency to help somehow. I cut him off. "Daniel, I can't get involved in anything that might be illegal. You understand that, right? My job has ethical standards I have to maintain." Then I hung up. I had a meeting at 9 and I couldn't be late. Day 2 was when things really started falling apart for them. The news got worse. Environmental test results came back showing dangerous levels of contamination in the river. Communities that had been drinking that water for years were being warned. People who'd worked at Montgomery Steel started coming forward with stories of illness, of friends who'd died of cancer, of accidents that had been covered up. A massive class action lawsuit was announced. Every major construction company and manufacturer that had contracts with Montgomery Steel immediately canceled. Their clients ran away as fast as they could. Richard had a heart attack from the stress and was rushed to the hospital. Patricia was calling Daniel nonstop, and I could see him falling apart in front of me. That evening, there was another emergency family meeting at the estate. Again, I wasn't invited. They spent hours trying to figure out how to protect their personal assets and pay for lawyers. That's when they discovered they couldn't. Everything was frozen. Everything was being seized as evidence. Lauren's car, leased through the company, was repossessed. Thomas's vacation home, purchased with company funds, was being investigated for fraud. Even Patricia's jewelry collection, half of it bought with laundered money, was seized. Daniel came home at midnight looking like a ghost. He found me in bed, reading a book. "Rachel," he said, his voice shaking. "We might lose everything. The house, everything." I looked up from my book. "We'll figure it out," I said calmly. He stared at me like I was a stranger. "That's all you have to say? My family is being destroyed, and that's all you have to say?" I put my book down and looked him straight in the eyes. "What do you want me to say, Daniel? 2 nights ago, your mother called me trash and physically removed my plate from the table. You said nothing. Not one word to defend me. So excuse me if I'm not crying over your family's problems." He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "This isn't the time for that." I smiled. "You're right. It's not." Then I turned off my light, rolled over, and went to sleep. I could feel him staring at my back in the darkness, finally realizing that something fundamental had changed between us. But he still had no idea how much. Day 3 was when they broke completely, when they finally understood that their entire world was gone and it was never coming back. My phone rang at 7 in the morning on day 3. It was Patricia. In 3 years, she had never once called me directly. "Rachel," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk. Family meeting today. Please come." I let the silence hang there for a long moment. "I wasn't aware I was family, Patricia. You made that very clear on Sunday." I could hear her breathing heavily. "Please," she said, and I could tell how much that single word cost her pride. "We need everyone. We need your help." I took my time getting ready. I wore my best suit, the one I wore to important meetings. I did my hair and makeup perfectly. When I arrived at the estate, I barely recognized the people sitting in that living room. Patricia looked like she'd aged 20 years. Her hair was messy, no makeup, wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Richard was in a wheelchair from his heart attack, looking pale and weak. Thomas's wife Sarah had left him and taken the children. Lauren's eyes were red and swollen from crying because all her social media sponsors had dropped her when her name became attached to the scandal. They all looked up when I walked in. Daniel's eyes were pleading, desperate. I sat down in the chair across from them, crossed my legs, and waited. Patricia couldn't even look at me when she spoke. "Rachel," she said quietly, "we need your help." I tilted my head. "I'm listening." Richard leaned forward in his wheelchair. "You work in environmental compliance. You understand the regulations, the system. We need someone who can help us navigate this. Explain to the investigators that mistakes were made, not crimes. That we didn't know the full extent of what was happening." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. A real, genuine laugh that filled that enormous room. They all stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You want my help?" I said, wiping my eyes. "After 3 years of treating me like I'm beneath you, after everything, you want my help?" Thomas stood up, angry. "Look, we know Mom said some things she shouldn't have. But this is bigger than that now. This is about family." I stood up too, pulling out my phone. "Let me tell you what's going to happen," I said, my voice cold and clear. "Tomorrow morning, more charges are coming. Personal charges against all of you. Environmental crimes, fraud, bribery, conspiracy, racketeering." Daniel's face went completely white. "How do you know that?" I looked at my husband, this man I'd loved, this man who'd never once stood up for me. "Because I'm the one who turned you all in." The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then everyone started talking at once. Thomas lunged toward me, and Daniel had to grab him. Lauren started screaming that I was insane, that I was evil. Patricia collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest. Richard just stared at me with pure hatred in his eyes. "You destroyed us," he said. "You came into our family and destroyed us." I shook my head. "No, you destroyed yourselves. You were poisoning rivers. You were making workers sick. People died because of what you did. Children drank contaminated water because you wanted to save money and keep this lifestyle." I gestured around the room. "I fell in love with Daniel. I tried to be part of this family. But you rejected me at every turn. Not because of who I was, but because I wasn't born into money like you. Because I came from nothing." Daniel was crying now, real tears streaming down his face. "Rachel, how could you do this to me? I'm your husband. I felt something break inside my chest, but my voice stayed steady. You stopped being my husband the moment you let your mother call me trash and said nothing. For 3 years, Daniel, I waited for you to choose me. Just once. You never did. Patricia found her voice weak and desperate. We'll lose everything. We'll go to prison. I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. Yes, you will. Your company will be shut down. Your money will be gone. And yes, some of you will go to prison. But here's what you need to understand. I didn't do this just because you were cruel to me. Even though I won't lie, that part feels good. I did this because what you were doing was killing people, destroying communities. And I took an oath in my profession to protect people and the environment above everything else. I looked at each of them one more time. You gave me a choice between being loyal to a family that never wanted me or being loyal to my principles and protecting innocent people. You made that choice very easy. I walked out of that house for the last time. Daniel called my name, but I didn't turn around. I got in my car and drove away, watching that mansion disappear in my rearview mirror. The next day, just like I'd said, more arrests were made. Richard, Patricia, and Thomas were all charged with multiple felonies. Lauren got a deal for testifying against the others. Daniel was never charged because he genuinely hadn't known the full extent of what his family was doing, but he was destroyed by association. Nobody would hire a Montgomery. Our marriage ended 4 months later. He tried to fight for alimony, which was almost funny considering he had nothing. I kept our house because it was in my name only, bought with my own money. I heard through mutual acquaintances what happened to them all. And I won't lie to you. Part of me felt satisfied knowing they'd finally faced consequences for their actions. The trials took almost a year. I testified at every single one. I sat in that witness stand and told the truth about everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard, everything I'd documented. Richard died in prison of another heart attack 6 months into his sentence. Patricia is serving 12 years. Thomas got 18. Lauren is living in a small apartment in another state, working at a department store. The last I heard, she'd changed her last name. And Daniel, he moved far away, somewhere out west I think. Changed his name too. Started over with nothing, just like I once had. I have no idea what he's doing now. Part of me hopes he learned something from all of this. That he learned to stand up for what's right, to defend the people he loves. But honestly, I doubt it. Some people never change. As for Montgomery Steel, the company was completely dissolved. The factory was shut down permanently. But here's the thing that makes me sleep well at night. Because of what happened, because of the investigation I started, real changes were made. The river is being cleaned up. It'll take years, maybe decades, but it's happening. The communities affected by the contamination received a settlement fund for medical care. New environmental regulations were put in place. Other companies got scared and started following the rules because they saw what happened to the Montgomerys. And the workers, the ones who'd been getting sick for years and were told it was just bad luck, they finally got answers. They finally got compensation. Some of them reached out to thank me. Those messages, those phone calls, they're what I hold on to when people tell me I went too far. I'm doing just fine now. Better than fine, actually. I got promoted at work. I'm now the regional director overseeing environmental compliance for 3 states. I bought a bigger house, one that's truly mine, with a garden where I grow vegetables. I started dating again, but this time I'm taking it slow. I'm making absolutely sure that anyone I let into my life treats me with respect from day one. And you know what's funny? I'm happy. Genuinely happy. Happier than I ever was trying to fit into the Montgomery family, trying to make myself smaller so they'd accept me. I learned something important through all of this. I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. I learned that you can't sacrifice your principles for people who don't value you. And I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you a villain, even when other people try to paint you that way. Do I regret what I did? People ask me that all the time. They want me to feel guilty. They want me to say I went too far, that I should have just divorced Daniel and walked away. But I can't say that, because if I had just walked away, the contamination would have continued. More people would have gotten sick. More communities would have been poisoned. And I would have known about it and done nothing. Some people think revenge drove me to do what I did. And I won't lie, there was definitely an element of satisfaction in watching that family fall apart after how they treated me. But that wasn't why I did it. That was just a bonus. I did it because it was right. I did it because innocent people were being hurt. I did it because sometimes the only way to stop something evil is to burn it all down and start over. They thought they were untouchable because they had money and power and a family name that went back generations. They thought they could treat people however they wanted, could break any law they wanted, and nothing bad would ever happen to them. They were wrong. And here's what I want you to understand, what I want you to take away from my story. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You don't have to accept cruelty just because it comes from family or from people with power. And when you see something wrong happening, something that's hurting innocent people, you have a responsibility to do something about it. I could have stayed quiet. I could have smiled through a few more years of Sunday dinners. Let them keep calling me names. Let them keep treating me like I was nothing. I could have looked the other way while they poisoned rivers and made people sick. But that's not who I am. That's never been who I am. I grew up with nothing. I pulled myself up through hard work and determination. And along the way, I learned that your character isn't defined by where you come from or how much money you have. It's defined by what you do when you're tested, when you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. Patricia was wrong about me. I'm not trash. I never was. I'm a woman who knows her worth, who stands by her principles, and who won't back down from doing what's right, even when it costs me everything. So yeah, I destroyed a family. I tore down an empire. I ended a 100-year legacy. And I'd do it again. Because at the end of the day, I can look at myself in the mirror. I can drive past those communities that are being cleaned up now. I can read messages from workers who finally got justice. And I can sleep peacefully at night knowing that I did the right thing. That's worth more than any amount of acceptance from people who never deserved my loyalty in the first place. My name is Rachel, and this is my story. The story of how I stopped being the woman who tried to fit in and became the woman who stood up. And I've never been prouder of who I am.